fortunate to have a very accomplished biologist, a wicked sharp researcher, an all-around great guy being willing to come and talk to us tonight about grizzly bears in the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem. But before I formally introduce Frank, I kind of wanted to do a brief overview of kind of grizzly bear management for the state of Idaho in the Upper Snake region. I think a lot of people don't really understand as far as what our bear management program is here in the Upper Snake as it relates to grizzly bears. So first off, our management platform essentially has 4 legs or 4 tiers to it. Information, education, and outreach, population monitoring, research, and data collection, conflict management, and then habitat management and conservation. So the first one, and probably the most important really, is kind of the information, education, and outreach program that we have here in the Upper Snake. And this runs the gamut. By and large, Greg Lazinski from our Information Education Communications Bureau heads this up, but has a whole lot of partnerships with the Forest Service, non-government organizations and whatnot. And the big thing there is we're trying to get the word out about grizzly bears and everything related to grizzly bears, how to recreate, how to live with grizzly bears, protecting yourself, protecting your equipment, everything like that. And the big thing as it comes up is we repeat, and then we repeat some more. One of the big things that we have in our area is, particularly in the summertime when obviously our bears are most active, is we have a high number of tourists and people coming to visit the area. And so, on any given week, people are changing by the thousands. So you go one week and you get the message out and okay, people get it. Well, 3 days later you have thousands of new people that are making the same mistakes, putting themselves and the bears at risk. So again, information, education, and outreach is a big and integral component to what we do here in Idaho. The next part, population monitoring, research, and data collection. This gives us the backbone for decisions we make. What's our population doing? What are causes of mortality? What are movement patterns? What are habitat preferences for bears? What's sustaining bears in our area? We collect a lot of information here within the Upper Snake region and have for a lot of years. And the big part, and I'll re-hit on this theme in a moment, is bears cover a lot of country. The Idaho portion of the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem is a small part, and so we work really hand in hand with the Interagency Grizzly Bear Study Team with Yellowstone National Park, Montana, and Wyoming, and it's a collaborative effort because in order to do right by the bears and those sorts of things, we have to look at this at a broader scale than what we have here in just Idaho. So, the next one, conflict management. The not so shiny part, but it's a reality. And as we've seen bear populations increase and bear distributions expand, it's become even more of a topic and more of a priority for us. Again, what we want for bears to be able to live safely and endure and be able to remain on the landscape. As well as we want people to be able to be safe, recreate, and enjoy the reason that they're here in Idaho. So again, conflict management takes up more and more of our time. Again, conflict management integrally associated with our information and education program. The last thing, habitat management and conservation. We are trying to do the best we can to do right by the bears as well as the citizens of the state of Idaho. With partnerships and these groups that I've talked about, we try to use our data, information, and things of that nature to try to protect habitats, maintain connective corridors, those sorts of things, inform the public of the value of certain things. So as I had just mentioned, the most important part is I've identified 4 legs of our management program, but none of them stand alone and none of them are isolated. They all interweave themselves together and influence the other one. Our data that we collect. It's going to inform us on, okay, what would be a high priority conservation area? What would be a connective corridor? You know, how are bears moving across the landscape? You know, what are high points of potential vehicle collisions? Those sorts of things. An interesting story as we're talking about as far as these things related locally is the bear picture up there on the upper left. As far as this bear in particular, it was really important data collection because we had an age, we had a body condition, we had all sorts of things, but this bear ended up being a conflict bear. And once we got our hands on the bear, it became pretty evident as to why. If you look at his dentition there, he's having a hard time making a living on natural forage. And in so doing, he decided breaking into residences and buildings was the best way for him to make a living. This became a chronic pattern, jeopardized the bear's safety as well as human safety. So again, just an example of kind of what we have going on as far as the integration of all of these legs of the grizzly bear management program that we have going on. So in a nutshell, those are the things that we engage in. In the department. If you have any questions specific to anything within the department, feel free to catch one of us here after this, or give us a call, or try to reach out to us at the regional office at any time. So with that, I want to introduce our first speaker in this series, and that's Frank von Manen. And Frank is a supervisory research wildlife biologist with the U.S. Geological Survey's Northern Rocky Mountain Science Center in Bozeman, Montana. He's the team leader of the interagency Grizzly Bear Study Team, a cooperative research team that addresses monitoring and research needs regarding the Greater Yellowstone grizzly bear population. Frank earned an MS degree in biology from, I'm going to slaughter this name, but it's Wageningen University in the Netherlands in 1989, and a PhD in ecology from the University of Tennessee in 1994. He joined the USGS in 2000 and researched black bears, red wolves, Florida panthers, and other wildlife in the southern U.S. He's collaborated with bear researchers in Ecuador, Sri Lanka, and China. And he was elected president of the International Association for Bear Research and Management for 2 terms from 2007 through 2013. And his current research emphasis is on the changing demographics and ecological plasticity of Yellowstone grizzly bears. Now, that said, Frank's no Thag Simmons, but he's still a pretty cool cat. So the thing I really enjoy about Frank is he's often the smartest guy in the room, but you never know it because he does a really good job of making complicated things seem simple to the rest of us, and he maintains a really great sense of humor and doesn't take himself so seriously. So with that, I want to introduce Frank, and I also want to say there will be time after to ask Frank questions. After his presentation, we hope that you'll keep your questions to that time frame so that we can make sure we get through what Frank has here to present. And then at that time, it'll be free game to pester him with anything that you're curious about. So again, let's give Frank a hand here. So.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, let me make sure, can everybody understand me okay? Well, first of all, let me start with this slide. Thanks so much for showing up tonight. It's great to have such a wonderful turnout. I'd like to recognize the Idaho Fish and Game and the Nature Conservancy for organizing this event and inviting me for this opening presentation. And thanks, Curtis and Steve, for the introduction. I'll get right into it. What I try to cover tonight is a lot of the more recent information, more recent research that we've been working on, but we'll go back into history a little bit and look at how we got to where we are now with the Yellowstone grizzly bear population. And it's really been an interesting journey of scientific discovery. Now, as soon as you hear me talk, of course, you hear that I'm not from around here. And that's true. As Curtis said, I got my degree in the Netherlands, and that's also where I grew up. And I'm usually not the type of person that talks a lot about himself, but there is a reason that I mentioned this. So I grew up with windmills and bikes and good beer and skating on the canals. And what I also grew up with was a landscape that, in a way, was empty. And what I mean with that is that as a kid growing up, I was really interested in biology, but one thing we didn't have was large predators. The largest predator we had was the red fox. Well, that doesn't quite compare to a grizzly bear. So it was something that I was always, in a way, missing and longing for. So when I had an opportunity to do, as part of my master's degree, to do an internship at the University of Tennessee with a professor that was well known for his black bear work at the time, Dr. Mike Pelton, I took advantage of that opportunity and jumped the puddle, so to speak, and spent the next 23 years working on various black bear projects in the Southeast. And that was an incredible experience. Also, we did a lot of field work in Great Smoky Mountains National Park and other parts of the Southeast. And just to show you how different things are down there with those big trees. This is where black bears den, way up in big hollow trees, sometimes 100 feet up in a tree. And they'll stay in a hollow tree like that for 6 months or so. Pretty incredible. But I was looking out west all the time, and I got an opportunity to join the Interagency Grizzly Bear Study Team a number of years ago here, and it's been a real privilege to be working here in this ecosystem, because as you can see, this is not an empty ecosystem. We have the full suite of large predators in this ecosystem, and it's an incredible experience to be hiking around and to recreate in these areas. As most of you probably do and know, it is somewhat of a humbling experience, knowing that there's predators out there that are way more powerful than you are. And to me, that is almost invigorating. There's something about hiking in this landscape that you cannot get in many other places. I'll talk a little bit about some general biology. So let's first look at the global brown bear, grizzly bear range. And what you see here is the range in the red color. So in North America, we're primarily talking, of course, about Alaska and Canada. Combined, there's roughly about 55,000 brown grizzly bears in North America. Then Russia really has the most brown bears. It's probably somewhere around 100,000. And then there's various status for populations in Europe and in the Middle East. Scandinavian population is doing pretty well, and then we have some pretty reasonable populations still in the Tibetan Plateau. So these are rough estimates, but roughly the population in the entire world is about 200,000. So other than black bears, this is the next species that is doing relatively well among the 8 bear species in the world. Then let's look a little bit closer at North America, and what you see here in light green is the of grizzly bears in North America, and in dark green is the current range. Pretty rough estimate there, but basically about in the lower 48s, we're talking at about 2% of the range still. So we've seen a drastic reduction in range, and a lot of that has occurred over the last 100, 200 years. Then focusing further in on the lower 48s, we have 6 grizzly bear recovery areas, recovery zones that are designated by the Fish and Wildlife Service, of which only 5 actually have grizzly bears. Yellowstone, where we'll focus on next, is the most southern population, and we have also the Northern Continental Divide population with about 1,000 individuals. I'll talk a little bit more about population size on the Yellowstone population a little bit later. Cabinet Yaak ecosystem has roughly about 45 grizzly bears. The Selkirks, including the Canadian portion of that, has about 80, and then the North Cascades, really pretty uncertain what the status is of that population. It's probably less than a dozen, maybe even fewer than that. The Bitterroots do not have any confirmed population of grizzly bears. There was a record back in 2007, fairly close to this recovery area. of a male that actually came from the Cabinet Yaak ecosystem. In terms of the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem where we are here, Yellowstone National Park, of course, has been at the center of recovery. And Yellowstone has a pretty unique history when it comes to bear management. Almost by default, it kind of became the leader in advancing bear management over time. You know, so we went from situations like this where bears, where people were literally watching bears at what they called the lunch counter, which was for bears only, like that needed to be specified. And in 1910, we had the first instance of bear panhandling, black bears in this case, but those became pretty common features of many national parks, including Yellowstone National Park, of course. And bears got pretty smart. So some learned to drive, even though they didn't quite know which side of the road they needed to be on. But this was a period where there was a lot of uncertainty and controversy about the Greater Yellowstone population and Yellowstone National Park particularly, because the concern was really with regard to these open pit garbage dumps where bears were openly feeding. It was basically a visitor attraction. And during the 60s, 50s and 60s, there were several reports produced within the Park Service that, one famous one is the Leopold report, that really suggested that the Park Service should develop a more natural management of wildlife, and particularly bears. So the switch was made for the Park Service to move from these open pit garbage dumps where bears have had access to garbage to closing those off. There was a big controversy, big debate at the time whether that should be done instantaneously or whether it should be phased in and be done gradually. At the time that the Park Service made the decision to do that instantaneously, and that led to a lot of mortality. In a matter of a fairly short time period, in the late 60s, early 70s, about 229 grizzly bears died because of management actions, because they were, once the dumps closed, they were getting into